Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Your Biography Podcast. I'm your host. My name is Lynna, and today we are talking about Eve. Eve being the personification of the creative aspect of man. When most people hear the name Eve, they immediately think of the first woman, the Garden of Eden, temptation, the forbidden fruit, and the fall of man. For centuries, the story has been interpreted as an account of humanity's first mistake. Eve has often been portrayed as the one who introduced sin into the world. But what if that was never the point of the story? What if Eve is not simply a historical woman, but a revelation about the structure of consciousness itself? What if Scripture is describing something taking place within every one of us, every moment of our lives? As we've discussed here on this podcast, the Bible is not primarily the biography of ancient people. It is the biography of consciousness itself. And we, you and I, every individual, is consciousness itself, having a human experience. We are the physical manifestations of consciousness itself. Every character in the Bible represents a function within the human psyche. Every event reveals a movement within consciousness. Every story describes the way awareness experiences itself through states of consciousness. And Eve is no exception. When we begin reading Scripture psychologically rather than historically, Eve suddenly becomes one of the most important characters in the entire Bible because she reveals how the invisible becomes visible. She reveals the creative aspect of man. To understand Eve, we must begin with her Hebrew name. And I'm not even going to try to pronounce Hebrew words any longer because I don't speak Hebrew. So I'm going to do my best. I've got them written down. I'm going to do my best just to give the definitions and try not to butcher the names. So the Hebrew name, Eve, usually it's transliterated as, I'm just going to spell it. I think it's Havvah. How would you pronounce that? I would say Chava or Chava, Chavah. So that's what it sounds like to me. And I know in Hebrew the H is, I'm not even going to try to do a Hava. There's a Hava, it's like a, I'm not even going to try, never mind. So it comes from the word comes from the Hebrew root, which is chaya. See, I just said that I wasn't going to try to pronounce these words, but I made my notes, and to better explain, I almost have to try to pronounce the words without leaving out part of it. So anyway, the Hebrew root means to live, to have life, or to give life. So, and Genesis itself confirms this meaning. And Adam called his wife's name Eve because she was the mother of all living, in Genesis 3:20. The name Eve literally means life, living one, or life giver. Notice what Scripture is emphasizing. Not femininity, not gender, life. The creative principle through which the unseen becomes living experience. This immediately shifts our understanding. If Adam represents awareness, identity, or consciousness itself, the first identity, then Eve represents the creative capacity through which consciousness expresses through that identity. One without the other accomplishes nothing. Awareness alone remains unexpressed. Creative imagination without awareness has no direction. Together, they produce experience. And remember, there is duality, there is polarity to everything in this world. This interpretation aligns remarkably with Neville Goddard's understanding that consciousness is the only reality. Neville repeatedly explained that imagination is God Himself acting within us. Creation does not occur outside of consciousness. Creation occurs as consciousness imagines itself into experience. Eve represents this creative movement. She is not separate from Adam because imagination is never separate from awareness. And Genesis tells us Eve is formed from Adam's side. Most interpretations imagine this as literal surgery, yet symbolism invites us deeper. She is not created from Adam's head to rule over him. She is not created from his feet to be beneath him. She comes from his side because she is of the same nature. She is consciousness expressing another aspect of itself. The creative faculty is not separate from awareness. It is awareness externalizing itself. Every experience begins this way. First, there is awareness. Then awareness imagines. Then imagination clothes awareness in a state of consciousness. Finally, the state appears as experience. Notice that every manifestation you've ever witnessed followed precisely this pattern. Before every invention, there was an idea. Before every relationship, there was an assumption. Before every achievement, there was an identity. Before every circumstance, there was an inner state. Eve represents this movement from invisible possibility into living expression. This also explains why imagination is so central to conscious creation. Many people attempt to change their lives by manipulating circumstances. They try to solve effects while leaving the cause untouched. But Scripture continually directs us inward. The creative process never begins in the world. It begins in consciousness. When Neville said that imagining creates reality, he was not teaching positive thinking. He was revealing the function symbolized by Eve. Imagination gives life to whatever awareness accepts as true. The question is never whether imagination is creating. The question is, what is it giving life, life to? Every fear receives life. Every assumption receives life. Every identity receives life. And every inner conversation receives life, whether consciously or unconsciously. The personification of Eve, that creative aspect, continually gives life to the state that consciousness occupies. This is why your imagination cannot be separated from your experience. The world is continually revealing what has been made alive within. There's another fascinating detail as well in Genesis that often goes unnoticed. Before Eve appears, Adam names the animals. In Hebrew thought, naming signifies recognition of nature. Adam becomes aware of the various aspects of experience, yet none are a suitable companion. Only when Eve appears does creative multiplication begin. Symbolically, awareness alone can observe, but awareness joined with imagination creates. Observation becomes participation. Potential becomes expression. Consciousness begins experiencing itself through form. This is exactly what occurs every time you occupy a state of consciousness. You are no longer merely observing life. You are participating in the creation of experience. This brings us to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Many people assume Eve's interaction with the tree represents moral failure. But psychologically, something much deeper is happening. The moment consciousness begins identifying appearances as good or bad, desirable or undesirable, success or failure, it enters duality. Instead of remaining identified with pure awareness, it becomes identified with appearances. States become mistaken for identity. Experience begins defining the individual rather than the individual defining experience. Notice that the serpent never creates anything. The serpent is spirit. The serpent simply persuades consciousness to identify with appearances. So the serpent does not represent evil. The serpent is spirit. Its power lies entirely in suggestion. The moment awareness accepts a suggestion, then imagination gives it life. That sequence is still operating today. A circumstance appears, a suggestion follows. I'm not enough, I'll never succeed, things never work out, I've always been this way. The suggestion itself possesses no creative power. It becomes creative only when imagination gives it life, when your assumption gives it life. This is Eve's function. She animates whatever consciousness embraces. So Eve is not outside of you. She represents the creative aspect of you. The Bible is simply telling the story of man and the Bible as your biography and all of the states that exist. So again, Eve animates whatever consciousness embraces. So consider the implications. If imagination can give life to fear, it can also give life to freedom. If it can give life to limitation, it can give life to abundance. If it can give life to separation, it can give life to love. Nothing has changed except the state that consciousness occupies. This is why Scripture continually invites us to renew the mind. Renewing the mind is not acquiring information. It is allowing imagination to give life to a different identity, a different state, a different assumption, a different understanding of yourself. One of Neville's most profound insights was that creation is finished. If creation is finished, then imagination is not manufacturing new realities. It is selecting from realities that already exist. Eve gives life to whichever state that consciousness occupies. She clothes awareness and experience. She brings the invisible into visibility. Suddenly, Genesis becomes intensely personal. Every morning, Eve awakens within you. Every assumption you entertain receives life. Every emotional participation nourishes a particular state. Every inner conversation is conceived within imagination before appearing in experience. So I'm going to repeat this. It is so important, and if you would like to write it down, please do so. Every morning, Eve awakens within you a state of consciousness. Eve awakens within you. Every assumption you entertain receives life. Every emotional participation nourishes a particular state of consciousness within you. Or within awareness, I should say, because we exist within awareness, within consciousness itself. Every inner conversation is conceived within imagination before appearing in experience. This is not occasional. It is continuous. No exceptions. You are always creating because imagination is always alive. Perhaps the greatest misunderstanding surrounding Eve is the belief that she represents weakness. Scripture presents exactly the opposite. Without Eve, nothing becomes living experience. She ate from the tree. And then knowledge was revealed. Without Eve, nothing becomes living experience. She is the bridge between possibility and manifestation. And speaking of manifestation, so think about the garden where Eve ate of the tree of good and evil. And then what happened? Adam ate, she gave the apple to Adam. Adam ate the apple. And then they were no longer hidden. Your manifestations, what you desire, the states that you decide to embody, nothing is hidden. When you utilize that creative aspect within you wisely. So again, whatever consciousness identifies with, imagination brings to life. And the principle operates whether we understand it or not. It's not a reward nor punishment, it's simply the nature of consciousness. As awareness matures, something beautiful begins to happen. Instead of unconsciously giving life to fear, we begin consciously giving life to truth. Instead of imagining from old identities, we imagine from our true nature. Instead of reacting to appearances, we occupy the state that already contains the fulfilled experience. Gradually, the creative aspect of consciousness comes into harmony with awareness itself. This is not suppression of imagination. It is the redemption of imagination. The creative faculty has always been perfect. It simply begins expressing a different identity. Perhaps that is why Eve is called the mother of all living. Everything you have ever experienced has first lived within consciousness. Every world has been born through imagination. Every state has become flesh through the creative principle symbolized by Eve. She is life. The creative aspect within you is life. Not because she creates independently, but because consciousness expresses itself through her. So as we close today's episode, I'd like to leave you with a question for contemplation. If Eve represents the creative aspect of your own consciousness, what are you giving life to today? Not merely through your actions, but through your assumptions, through your imagination, through your inner conversations, through the identity you have accepted as yourself. Because whatever awareness embraces, imagination faithfully brings to life. What are you consciously aware of being? What are you consciously aware of experiencing? What you focus on grows, correct? Have you ever heard that phrase? What are you focused on? You're giving it life. You are activating that creative aspect within you, personified as Eve, and giving life to what you focus on, what you imagine, and the assumptions that you create. So that's all I have for today's episode. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of the Bible, Your Biography Podcast. If you have not checked out my other podcast or YouTube channels, please feel free to do so. I've got links in the show notes. If you're watching on YouTube, there are links in the description. Everything ties together. The teachings on the law, the teachings on the promise, the teachings of Scripture. All of it explains what is happening within each and every one of us as we move from a state of profound sleep into a state of awakening. So remember, until next time, that Scripture is not simply telling the story of ancient people, it is revealing the movements of your own consciousness. And as you begin to recognize yourself within these stories, you begin to understand that the Bible has always been your biography. I will see you all in the next episode. Bye now.